He started as a patrolman roughly 30 years ago. Our guest today is a Chicago native who grew up in Cabrini Green until he was 9 years old. He deserves enormous credit for the repeat gun offender law, which was enacted in Springfield, which started right here at the City Club of Chicago. He led the charge and got the job done. Ladies and gentlemen, Superintendent Eddie Johnston. Superintendent. All right, sir.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Jay, for that gracious introduction. Now, I know you all may not know this, but I'm not much of a morning person. I'm still wired as a beat cop despite being named superintendent of the Chicago Police Department almost 4 years ago. So this job has actually conditioned me to be a night owl. And that's especially having been with the department for 31 years. So I've grown accustomed to being up all night because I'm constantly getting calls. But now I will say this, a nice breakfast can help start anyone's day, even the leader of the second largest department in the country. So I found the bacon and eggs to be particularly delightful and particularly motivating. So here we go. Bear with me. So first, I want to begin by looking back on the summer of 2019. And I'll tell you all that I'm pleased to report that crime was down in all major categories this summer compared to last summer. The credit for these declines go to several partners. You know, our community partners, our business partners, the clergy, our elected officials, you know, our outgoing and incoming mayor. But I want to focus on the men and women of the Chicago Police Department, because they worked every weekend, every day of this past summer. Many of our officers canceled vacations and missed family barbecues to patrol high-traffic areas such as the beaches and downtown shopping districts. Summer patrols also included additional manpower in the neighborhoods around the city. Officers rode bicycles through bustling parks and responded to calls on hot summer nights when tensions can be as high as the temperature. Under Mayor Lightfoot's leadership, CPD has also brought other city agencies in to help keep our city safe. Now, this included calling in the fire and water departments to increase visibility and act as an extra set of eyes and ears for the police. Other partners included the Chicago Public Schools, which helped cultivate youth outreach workers. Now, these CPS students helped us keep the peace on several occasions when groups of young people planned to swarm the downtown area. Now, all young people ought to feel welcome to the downtown area and anywhere throughout the city, but everyone has to play by the rules. These outreach workers help CPD and the students arriving on the train maintain a level head. Our young people deserve a pat on the back for those efforts because they truly did partner with us during the summer to keep those tensions down. CPD also teamed with the Department of Streets and Sands and several nonprofits to clean up vacant lots throughout the city this past summer. Operation Clean was performed in neighborhoods on the south and west side. And the idea is that cleaning up vacant lots and debris make everyone feel just a little bit better about the communities that they live in. Now, restoring this neighborhood pride goes a long way toward encouraging neighbors to stick up on the block and call 911 when they see a problem. Our summer deployment strategy was based largely on technology that debuted in Chicago's 7th or Inglewood district in February of 2017. Now, you may have heard me talk about our Strategic Decision Support Center, or Sdsc Rooms. These digital nerve centers are equipped with surveillance video cameras and gunshot detection systems. Officers working in these rooms are alerted to gunshots and calls for service in real time. They can turn on a network of cameras in the area where officers are responding and help us respond quicker. Now, I've seen officers in these SDSC rooms catch a shooting on camera and relay that description of the offender as well as the shooter's exact location to those en route to the scene. In a handful of cases, the officers have arrived while the offender is still on scene, still firing a weapon. Now, these real-time video footage has also helped us provide prosecutors additional evidence that can be used in court, helping with our clearance rate and keeping the dangerous people out of our neighborhoods. The information on calls for service gathered by the Sdsc Rooms is also combined with 911 calls. Special software then looks at this activity and helps us to identify crime patterns. This analysis is used to deploy officers to likely hotspots, and the goal is to deter crime before it even takes place. Now, I believe this strategy is working, and I point to the 7th District as evidence. The first year that the Sdsc Room was operational in the Southside District, there was a 45% reduction in shootings. Homicides also fell 43% compared to the previous year. The reductions in 2017 resulted in the lowest level of gun violence seen in Inglewood since the turn of the century. Now, I want to take a moment to remind everyone here that these aren't simply numbers. These are people's lives. Individuals who suffer from gunshot wounds never truly heal. Their wounds may mend, but the scars may fade, but the experience of being shot leaves them forever changed. Now, murders are even worse, robbing our city of individuals who might have gone on to do great things. Gun violence steals mothers of their sons, and it tears families apart. It's with this in mind that we expanded the Sdsc Rooms. These technology hubs are now in 20 of the 22 police districts throughout the city. Citywide, there's been a 30% reduction in murders since the first Sdsc Room debuted. Burglaries and robberies citywide are also down 20% during the same time period, and shootings are down 30%. Now, the intel we gained from these rooms was what drove our summer violence plan. And well, the results are in, and I'm happy to report that this past summer, from Memorial Day to Labor Day, Chicago saw an 18% reduction in murders compared to the same time last year. Shooting incidents were down nearly 11% this past summer compared to last year. Robberies were also down 12%, and burglaries were down a whopping 23% in the summer of 2019 compared to the summer of 2018. Now, I'm certainly proud of these numbers and the officers who worked hard to keep the city safe. But there's a lot more work to do and no cause for celebration. Mayor Lightfoot and I both share the same goal, making Chicago the safest big city in the country. The only way to achieve this goal is by working hand in hand with the communities that we serve. So community policing is at the core of everything that the Chicago Police Department does. Every district has a community policing program. Now, these officers were often tucked away in forgotten corners of the districts previously, and I knew this needed to change. So in an effort to do so, I transformed CAPS into the community, which was a program or a strategy, into the community policing citywide philosophy. I also brought community policing under the direct supervision of the superintendent's office, because I truly believe that every police officer is a community policing officer. And Chicago simply cannot arrest its way out of our crime problem. We need the community to stand with us and address the root causes of violence. We need to engage with residents in order to successfully accomplish this goal. So that means we need to do more than respond to 911 calls. CPD scoured the country looking for the best ways to accomplish this task. So a nationwide search led us to the city of New York, which launched the District Collaboration Officer, or DCO program, in 2015. Now, I will say this. As a lifelong Chicago resident, I'm really reluctant to give New York credit for anything. Their pizza really sucks compared to ours. And I'll take the Bears over the Jets or Giants any day. But still, the program seemed different when I went there to visit. Chicago police officers spend the bulk of their shifts answering calls for service over the radio. And there simply isn't time to get to know people when you're responding to one radio call after another. The DCO program begins by recognizing this and addresses it by having a dedicated set of police officers who are free from having to respond to these constant radio calls. These officers instead are asked to reach out to those living within the districts and have meaningful conversation about safety in those neighborhoods every day. Now, these conversations can include concerns both big and small, from cars speeding near a school to an abandoned house that's drawing a criminal element. DCOs then work with the members of the community, as well as the officers working in the patrol division and elsewhere, to address these chronic problems. They even go so far as to hand out their cell phone numbers to residents, giving those within the community a face and a name that they can reach out to when they have concerns that don't quite warrant a 911 call. And remember, they can use that phone number 24 hours a day. Now, another benefit to this program is that the communities can see CPD helping them proactively, working to solve lingering problems and build community trust. Now, if a big incident were to rattle the neighborhood, these residents know CPD has their backs because we've proved it already by working with them to remedy those nagging problems. The DCO program made its Chicago debut in January in the 25th District, or Grand Central District, with 10 dedicated officers and a sergeant. Now, we recently took an early look at the program and found that the calls for service have fallen by 5% in the district when compared to other similar districts. Now, these figures were compared year-to-date through September 1st. Now, since providing their cell phone numbers to residents within the community, the DCOs in this Northwest Side district have returned more than 20,000 phone calls to residents in that neighborhood. Now, these figures tell me that people living within these neighborhoods are not only utilizing the DCO program, but they're calling these officers to solve problems instead of calling 911. Now, this has resulted in another tremendous benefit for the department. Police districts frequently receive low-priority calls that need to be answered, but do not pose an immediate threat to the public. These are called RAPs, or radio assignment pendings. Well, RAPs are down in that particular district now 90% this year through September 1st when compared to other similar districts. Now, this tells me that the residents there are reaching out to the DCO officers rather than calling 911 for minor issues, which actually frees up the patrol officers to respond to more calls for service more quickly. CPD also tracks positive community interactions. These are also up by 90% in the 25th District for the same time frame year-to-date. Now, it's with this in mind that the DCO program will be expanded to the 15th District, or Austin, in this November. Now, Commander Ernest Cato is eager to implement the program within this West Side District. Now, while the early signs are promising, the pilot program will be evaluated by a research team at Northwestern University before we look to bring the DCO program to neighborhoods throughout the city. I also want to take some time this morning to talk about CPD's detective division. So clearance rates are a concern for the department, as well as those living on the blocks we're sworn to protect and serve. Police officers grow weary of arresting the same people again and again. Those living on the blocks with a known troublemaker also might reach out to CPD to help solve that particular problem. But if we arrest an individual, particularly for a gun offense, and that person returns to that same block days later or even hours later, why would those good people continue to call the police fearing retaliation? I wouldn't. Would you? Now, pointing out the flaws in the system is a fine first step, but it won't solve the problem. Cook County State's Attorney Kim Fox and I are working together to come up with solutions. Now, you may have heard that she and I don't get along, but that's not true. The superintendent and state's attorney, not just in Chicago, but anywhere, need to work together for the good of that particular city. So I like to compare the relationship with Kim and I to a marriage. We might not always see eye to eye on every issue, and occasionally someone might even have to sleep on the couch, and hopefully it won't be me. But that doesn't mean we don't come together when it matters most. Perhaps the best example of this is our shared effort to embed assistant state's attorneys into CPD districts throughout the city. So the idea here is that prosecutors are on the ground with the police officers during the investigation. They have input on what evidence is collected, how that evidence is collected, and ultimately how it's presented to a judge. The result has been that successful prosecutions in these particular districts are now up 60%. The conviction rate for gun crimes is now up nearly 80%. This just shows that the collaboration between police and prosecutors is essential for all that we strive to make the city of Chicago a safer place to live, work, and play. Successful prosecutions nowadays are increasingly relying on video evidence and cell phone data. Now, detectives have long known this and came up with a great idea after seeing the Sdsc Rooms and their operational use within the patrol districts. They wanted an Sdsc room specifically for detectives. So now we provided them with that, and we call these rooms the Area Tech Centers, or ATCs. So now each of the 3 detective areas throughout the city now have an ATC. And I want to thank Ken Griffin and the University of Chicago Crime Lab for funding this effort. These rooms are designed to give detectives the technology necessary to recreate an incident and track a suspect. A sergeant, detectives, and police officers and civilian analysts trained in these technologies work together to gather that information in the ATCs. Now, this includes collecting pictures, text messages, social media posts, and location data from a suspect's cell phone. The ACT can quickly pull surveillance video from more than 40,000 cameras that are placed throughout the city of Chicago. The technology within these ATCs also allows detectives to pull video footage from private security cameras, and we just simply didn't have the ability to do that last year. Detectives no longer have to wait for special software to be able to play video from a variety of recording devices. The ATCs cut through all of that, allowing detectives to quickly gather that evidence. The latest example and benefit of these ATCs came just last week in the case of Michael Blackman, that I'm sure you all have heard about. Mr. Blackman is a suspect in the daytime shooting of a 28-year-old woman who was on her way to lunch in the busy Fulton Market district. Detectives working with the ATC rooms were able to gather surveillance video of the shooting, which was distributed with the help of the media. Tips poured in, eventually leading us to a bike shop where Mr. Blackman had a tire repaired just moments before the shooting occurred. Now, footage from the bike shop gave us a clearer picture of Mr. Blackman. Detectives were able to then trace Mr. Blackman using video evidence to his residence in the West Englewood neighborhood. After answering the front door, Mr. Blackman fled out of the back of the house where officers were waiting for him. Mr. Blackman then opened fire on a Chicago police officer, striking him in the leg and in the groin. The officer returned fire, but didn't strike the suspect. Now, on the way to the hospital, the officers that were with that particular officer had enough wherewithal to put him in the back of the squad car, taking him to the hospital. On the way to the hospital, that particular officer lost nearly a third of the blood in his body. But thankfully, the medical staff at Christ Hospital were able to quickly treat that wound and stop the bleeding. The officer at the scene, that particular officer, used a special tourniquet on himself that he was carrying at the time to reduce the bleeding. So I want to thank the Chicago Police Foundation for providing these life-saving tourniquets and other first aid items called Lemark kits to the Chicago Police Department. For 6 hours after shooting the officer, Mr. Blackman hid just blocks away. Now again, detectives used video footage to track him down. He again fled and opened fire on police officers near a railroad embankment in the area. Mr. Blackman was shot several times in the exchange, and then he was apprehended and taken to a neighborhood hospital. Mr. Blackman was charged with 5 counts of attempted murder on Monday, and he's expected to recover from his wounds. Detectives working alongside SWAT teams and officers did a remarkable job in this case, but the ATC rooms undoubtedly helped us track down the suspect, and I have to be honest with you all and say, had we not had that technology in place, we might still be looking for him right now. Detectives used the same technology to track down a pair of offenders wanted in connection with a shooting that took place on Monday in the 200 block of South Michigan Avenue, our busy downtown area. 18-year-old Angel Martinez was charged Wednesday with aggravated discharge of a firearm and aggravated unlawful use of a weapon in this incident that resulted in a window of a bakery along the Magnificent Mile being damaged by a bullet. Martinez also had 2 warrants and was arrested with a 17-year-old female. Now, this juvenile offender was also charged with aggravated use of an unlawful weapon. The bottom line is this: Chicago is second only to London in terms of the number of surveillance cameras in use. So I'll say this: if you decide to commit a crime, there's a good possibility you're going to be caught on video. So don't commit crimes. Video recordings don't lie under oath. Recordings don't need to be sworn in to testify. So if you want to argue with the video, I can only say good luck with that. This technology, along with Chicago's efforts in community policing, improving transparency, and more, will be on display from October 26th through the 29th at the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Chicago's McCormick Place will host this conference that brings thousands of police chiefs throughout the country and overseas to talk about the ways to improve public safety. Now, I have to admit to you all, in 2016, I never imagined hosting this conference. Back then, the murders and shootings were near record highs. And I think we've turned a corner since then. I'm seeing other cities turn to us, wondering how we turned all this around. Now, again, I realize there's a lot more to do. It's not time to spike the ball, but we are seeing progress. Guns and gangs continue to threaten our way of life in the city of Chicago. But I want to continue to work towards building a safer Chicago with officers who can empathize with those that they are sworn to serve and protect. And I also want to continue to implement the changes that are spelled out in the consent decree, which I firmly believe will make CPD a better department. I believe Chicago is on the right path, and I look forward to sharing our story with others at the International Association of Chiefs Conference, as well as still learning what other departments are doing that can or may work here. So with that, I'll take questions, but before I do that, I'd like to remind everybody to stay safe and go Bears. Thank you all. Nah, I'm good.
So I'm a cops kid, and when you saw Superintendent Johnston take a pause as he talked about the officer who was just shot, they are people just like we are. And I feel like I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, like this group here already knows that. But for those in the media who may be watching, they're real people, and we just appreciate you all for that so much.
Thank you.
So we have a few questions. Michael Fenstermacher from HPS Partners, are you in the room? Be glad that you're in the room, because since you submitted this question earlier, you know my theory, right? If you're not here, your question might not get asked. So, I'm totally joking about that. What percentage of sworn officer man hours are spent out patrolling versus administrative hours? How does the CPD compare to other major metro cities, and is that ratio optimized to prevent crime rather than react to it?
Yeah, you know, I tell you, with the technology and the investments we've made over the past few years, we're really becoming a more proactive department. But in terms of what's the percentage between officers that actually patrol the field and admin, it's probably, I would say, a good 85% patrol. You know, there are functions administratively that we need sworn officers to do, but I have to admit also that some of those officers that are doing administrative work, we can do a better job of civilianizing that, and we're in the midst of doing that right now. But we're probably not far off from other major departments in terms of that ratio. But we've seen a lot of progress in the city of Chicago, but we just have to keep chipping at the rock to keep improving.
This is an interesting question from Dan Schoenberger from Baird and Warner, and I know he's here because he handed me his question. How many of these drive-by shootings actually ever get solved?
You know, so listen, let me take a moment to explain the clearance rate and how we solve things. So the FBI gives all of us the formula for clearance rates. Now, when you hear people say that Chicago's clearance rate is only 17 or 18%, that's half true and not half true. That is the clearance rate for this particular calendar year. Now remember, real-time policing is not like TV, 48 hours, and all those crime shows you see. It doesn't work like that. So when murders happen, especially from the middle of the year to December, it's very difficult to solve those murders in the calendar year. So other big cities don't give you that number. Chicago is very transparent in that. So the clearance rate is actually calculated in a different manner than that. You get credit for murders that you solve in previous years in that calendar year. So for example, if a murder was committed in 2016 and we clear it this year, it goes to our clearance rate this year. So right now, our clearance rate is actually hovering around 50%. Now, I'm not happy with that or satisfied with it, but that's closer in line with other major departments. The other cities really only give you that number. That's why when you hear other cities say our clearance rate is 60%, 70%, and you hear Chicago's at 17%, we're actually comparing apples and oranges, because that low number is the clearance rate for this calendar year. And like you look at the month of January when we give you that clearance rate, of course it's going to be really low because you're in the first month of the year and it's difficult to solve those murders that quickly. Now sometimes we do, but for the most part, Chicago is no different from any other major department. It takes time to solve those murders. Now, having said that, I will say this. In a lot of these cases, we know who the shooters are. We just may not have all the evidence that we need to bring prosecution, but we know who the individuals are. So we continue to work with the state's attorney's office so that we can put the best case forth to get a conviction, a charging and conviction. So I would say probably in about 75% of the murders and shootings, we have a good idea of who those actual offenders are. It's just a matter of having the evidence. And remember, we can't put cameras on every block in the city. That's just not going to happen. So we still have to depend on witnesses to come forward and give the testimony when they observe these things. And in some of our challenging areas, people are afraid sometimes to do that. That's why we have to continue to work with our entire judicial system to ensure these victims that they will be protected and that we will have successful prosecutions of these offenders.
Besides Johns, how many people do we have that are in the teaching, psychology, law study field in the room? One. Yeah, the psychology of doing what you do is amazing. Of learning all of the stuff that goes on. There's I hope I get to all these questions, everybody. There's a lot just to learn and to understand. It is more than just what you say from watching my favorite Chicago PD show. And I did watch Voight last night, and yes, he did it again. I may butcher this name, Zawaha McElrath? Zawaya, thank you, from Year Up. What impact do you consider the lack of job opportunities on the crime rate? A little bit of a softball.
Okay, yeah, that.
Yeah.
Listen, you always hear me say we can't arrest our way out of this issue, and we can't. But we have to address root causes, and job opportunities is one of those root causes. I will tell you all this. So out of the documented gang members that we have in the city of Chicago, and we have over 100,000 documented gang members, which is a lot. But I will say this, out of that population of people, there's still just a small percentage of those people that are just criminals, just hardcore criminals. A lot of them want to get out of that lifestyle. They just don't know how. They just don't know how. So we have to do a better job, not just in Chicago, but across this country, of providing these individuals a pathway to get out of that lifestyle and a job opportunity, educational opportunities, mental health treatment, housing. All of those things matter. So if we could provide jobs so they can take care of their families to those individuals, they would get out of that lifestyle.
If you see me flipping questions around, it's because I'm also kind of guided by some of Superintendent Johnston's answers. So Mikasa Johnson, you're here? Hello. State of emergency, you familiar with them?
Yes.
Okay. What type of mental health service partnerships does CPD utilize to address the root cause of mental illness that leads to violence? Good question.
That's a great question.
Good question.
Because that's extremely important. So I would say large percentage of folks that we come into contact on a daily basis do have mental health issues. So we do what's called call-ins, and with those, we've identified a population of folks that will either be offenders of gun violence or victims of gun violence. And so what we do is we go to those people's residences, we knock on the door, and we offer them services, and we take mental health providers with us to those locations. You know, we hold, I won't call them seminars, but we bring them in too, to talk to a population of folks, and we offer them these services because, you know, listen, Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart and I, we meet on a regular basis. And I told you all before, one of our first meetings, he blew my mind when he told me that Cook County Jail was the largest provider of mental health treatment in the country. And that's just bizarre. That makes no sense because the message we're sending is that you have to go to jail to get mental health treatment, and it shouldn't be like that. So mental health treatment for myself and CPD is a major priority, and we partner with several organizations to provide that.
We've got a ton of really good questions, and as usual, if we don't get to all of them, one thing that Superintendent Johnston's office has been really good about doing is getting back, and I don't know if you put it on social media or whatever, but I know that they get the questions answered, so know that if we don't get to all of them, he will get to them. So Dr. Kimball Landon, you're here, and you are a doctor. Why would I say that? Because I can't read that. From Safe Haven. I hope I get this right. If I don't, maybe you can help me a little bit. We normally don't do audience participation, but you get a pass because you're a doctor. It says something about after-school programs and kids and programs for adults in probation. Can you give me a little bit about what this actually says?
We have after-school programs for the kids and job programs for good and probation and parole. Those two things alone gain crime and murder 50%. Will you support them?
Yeah,
Okay.
you know, you're absolutely right. You know, I was speaking to a group not too long ago, and I told them, if you look at our graphs in terms of when crime spikes through the summertime, and then it goes back down when, people mistakenly think it's when the weather cools off. But it's when kids go back to school. So there's a correlation with that. You know, you look at our property crimes, and you look at the schools within those areas. If you look at a lot of delinquency and truancy in schools, you'll probably see burglaries and thefts crop up a little bit, and that's because they don't have anything to do. So if we provide them with better resources during the summer months, you'll see our crime kind of level out during that time because that old saying, an idle mind is the devil's playground, is true. So the more we keep them occupied, the more we keep our city safe.
So Jill, that kind of answers your question too about winter month strategies. Okay. Creola Hampton, are you here? Okay, well, she sent in a really good question. To what extent is CPD partnering with community-based organizations to both engage the community and to be part of training officers on best practices and approaches for residents?
It's a great question. So listen, I always say CPD is only as strong as the faith that the community has in it, and I mean that. So we've partnered with a lot of community organizations to not only train officers, we bring them actually into our police academy, and the police recruits go through training with these individuals while they're in the academy. Because, listen, I think one of the things that we kind of ignored before, but we're getting better at, but we're not where I want to see us, is that when we bring people in that don't understand different cultures, Chicago is one of the most diverse cities in the country. And that's a great thing. That's a wonderful thing. But what it does is when people don't understand different cultures, they tend to resist them. And if they don't know the different nuances of those cultures, they might mistake something for something else. And that's what we don't want. So we've done a really good job, but still not where I want us to be in terms of bringing in community partners to help us train not just the recruits, but the more veteran officers also into how these cultures operate so they can better understand them.
Look at this room and you can see the diversity of Chicago. We often talk at City Club about how we want to look like the city of Chicago, and I think this room is a pretty good representation, wouldn't you say, Superintendent?
It actually is, yeah.
Robert Beeman, I know you're here, and I think he kind of touched on your question with the exception of the consent decree, so we're going to move on that one. Dennis Mondero?
Yes.
Okay, from the Chinese Mutual Aid Association. Best officers are given credit for the number of arrests that they make and for traffic tickets that they write. Any thought given to credit to officers for their proactive community engagement with respect to business?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because actually, they don't really get credit for arrests and tickets. Because think about it like this. If we did that, if we focused on that and gave them credit for that type of stuff, it would cause officers to go out and focus on that and maybe do things we don't want them to do. So we really don't, and then that's kind of like a quota system. So we don't do that. What we do, however, is the officers, we've created a new award for community engagement for police officers because that's at the crux of what we do. We just simply have to treat everybody in our city the way we want our families treated. So we put a lot of emphasis now onto how we treat every community in this city, and I think that that's the way to go. So thank you for that question.
Okay, sorry. So I like these more intimate rooms. We have a little bit more room to give, and Superintendent Johnston is so giving, not just to the City Club, but to the city of Chicago. And I've watched him as we've worked together over the past few years, and I think he's pretty awesome. So,
Thank you all. Thank you.